Hello, I'm Notes, and it's still October, so let's continue on with our October-based themed reviews, looking at those darker albums that were released this year. One of those darker bands were IQ, and they released a new album this year called Road of Bones. Let's start at the beginning and analyze why we're actually looking at IQ as opposed to another band. Why are these guys spooky and dark? Well, back in the 1980s, progressive rock was considered dead by a lot of people. Those bands from the 70s that were considered prog legends were only putting out mainstream music. Let's just suffice it to say that most people considered prog dead. So those that did endeavor to take on the prog flag had to do so in a new light. So from those that had actually risen above the naysayers, they were very passionate about what they were doing, and because of that they were very theatrical. They were very dark as well. The most notable of the bands were most likely Marillion, but IQ was also kind of at that cream of the crop in terms of the Neo Prog, as they were being called, kind of that new form of progressive rock after the whole 70s version of progressive rock. So in 1983, IQ put out Tales from a Lush Attic, and they took the progressive rock scene by storm. This really solidified their cult following, especially with their follow-up in 1985 by The Wake. Both considered to be progressive rock masterpieces in their own rights at that time, kind of showing that even in the darkest times, beautiful music can still be made. For me, IQ always had three main features that made them special to me. The first was kind of a dark atmosphere created by deep synthesizers that used both a very deep organ sound as well as really high mellotron sounds. The second characteristic for me of IQ is Peter Nichols' singing style. He's very theatrical and very passionate about what he sings, almost bringing kind of like a musical theater almost. You can almost hear Phantom of the Opera kind of in the background of his mind every once in a while. And finally, and I would argue the most crucial part to IQ, is the use of keyboards and electric guitars. With the keyboards and the electric guitars, the solos and the interplay between the two. For me, that's what makes IQ kind of rise above that of, say, Marillion or Pendragon or any of those other bands that came out around that time. For me, what put IQ kind of over the top is their unique interplay of both the keyboards and the guitars. And a lot of that had to do with Mike Holmes on the electric guitar, with the keyboard solos provided by Martin Orford. And just the inner workings between these two characters, it's astounding the sounds that these guys can create. These solos provide kind of that jump on the couch air guitar that I like to call. And what is that jump on a couch air guitar solo that I'm talking about? This was the foundation for IQ. And even though their musical style has evolved and changed throughout the years, this was kind of that presence that was always there. This is what was kind of always behind the scenes. So, as you can tell by the title of this video, they put out a new album this year called Road of Bones. Before I jump into the review, I do need to kind of identify those characters on the album itself. Paul Cook is back on drums. He was not on their last album, but he's been with the band since their formation. And more surprisingly, Tim Izzu is back on bass. He hasn't been with the band since 1992, 1993. He left. This spot has been filled for the past 20 years by John Jowett. So really, all of the original characters from the beginning are back on this album, except for one. Back in 2004, Martin Orford left the band. First in 2009, when they released Frequency, Mark Westworth was the keyboardist. He left. So to fill Mark's role, Neil Durat came in to help with this album. So now that we know a little bit about this, let's actually dive into the Road of Bones. Well, I hated it. Who said that? I did. Who are you and what are you doing on my review? I'm your first impression of this album, and I hated it. Right, my first impression on this album. Okay, folks, let's just give him his dues. It will make sense, and it will come full circle. I hope. Okay, first off, it doesn't even sound like IQ. Where are those three aspects that we love so much? Where are those jump onto a couch and air guitar solos? Where are those interplays between the guitars and the keyboards? And really, where's the passion from Peter Nichols? Okay, he doesn't sound like he's got a mouthful of marbles like he did back in the Ever era, but where's that passion? Where's the theatrics? Are we done yet? No, I'm not done yet. Also, the structure of this album doesn't make any sense. You have two opening tracks, then you have this middle track, which is 20 minutes long, and then you have two separate closing tracks. Now, that's not to say that this kind of a structure doesn't work, because it has worked in the past. You have the Flower Kings and you have Kappa. They both released really solid albums with the big long song being the second song, so it can work. Porcupine Tree proved it with Fear of a Bleak Planet. They had two main songs at the beginning. You had the really long 17-minute long song, and then you had those three last songs that kind of rounded out the album. The 3-act system can work, and this has been proven time and time again. Fido did it with number 7. Thomas Bodine did it with I Am. While we're on the subject of long songs, we need to talk about Without Walls. IQ is great at crafting really long songs that push the boundaries. They started off their career with The Last Human Gateway being the first song off of their first album, being that really long song. You have the finishing track from Subterranea, their double concept album that broke away from that lead singer disbanding from the band. You even have Harvest of Souls, which was the last track on my favorite album from them. All three long songs have been stellar. And then you have Without Walls. Also, Without Walls sounds a lot like what we've already heard before. In fact, they steal their own technique right from Harvest of Souls, and I need to show you this. This is important. So now I'm going to play for you two little snippets from two IQ songs. The first being the Without Walls. Okay, that was really cool, but it sounds very familiar. Sounds very familiar, doesn't it? And do I even need to mention the album cover of this album? It kind of looks like another album that we just heard. Are you done? No, see, I've already pointed this out, but I really need to drive this home. It doesn't feel as though this album has structure. Even if we go down to the individual songs on here, the songs themselves don't seem to have too much structure on it. And maybe this is just the orchestration being lost when Martin left. Anything else? I'm not done yet. I don't understand why people love this album so much. Okay, I have a theory about this. See, IQ can be related to Doctor Who, and bear with me now. I know I'm going to show my geek colors, but it will make sense. With Doctor Who, everybody remembers their first Doctor. With IQ, everybody remembers their first album. For me, it was Dark Matter. So every album that I listened to after that, it just didn't quite resonate with me as much. Which is very strange, because if you look at songs from even The Seventh House, it has better songs on it. If you look at Subterranea, it has a much better concept and a more fulfilling album to listen to. For me, I still go back and I still love Dark Matter because it was my first. So whenever I see a new album by IQ, all the ratings skyrocket because a lot of people, this is their first album that they heard from them. Of course they're going to give them a really high rating, but then when they go and start listening to the other albums, they're still going to have that, well, yeah, these are good, but it's not as good as this other one. See, that still doesn't explain why people are still giving it a really high rating. People that had listened to IQ before would have at least identified all these features. Agreed. But have you listened to the bonus disc yet? There's a bonus disc. Yes, there is a bonus disc, and I recommend you have a listen to that. Okay, I don't see how that's going to change my opinion. I mean, a bonus disc is usually the songs that don't fit on the album. Sometimes I'm out inside. What? Yeah. What? Yeah. Okay. What was that? I don't know, but it definitely proves that you need to go back and really listen to this album. Okay, that was one song. That doesn't prove anything. This is amazing. Okay, maybe I need some more time with this album. I'm gonna go and do that now. And now we've come full circle. So now that I've had a chance to really sit down and listen to this album, what do I think? Well, first off, the album is not as bad as I originally thought. When I first heard this back in May, I was not happy. I did not get it. I listened to it for about a week and a half, and then I put it on the shelf and I didn't touch it. When I came around to start to review this album, I took a couple weeks and I just dove into this album, as well as the rest of the IQ catalog, just to find out where it compares with their past work. And does it hold up? In my mind, it's still lacking those 3 points that I had pointed out before. I know I discussed the interplay between the keyboards and the guitar, so I'll leave that alone. This album was really kind of a strange mishmash of them trying new things, you know, taking away those guitar and those keyboard solos and putting in more of a chugging, kind of a driving force with that. Kind of like what Genesis did back in the 80s when they kind of stopped doing the really elaborate keyboards and going through with more of a percussion-driven sounds. You hear this on Mama, and you hear this on Home by the Sea. And I guess you could say that Knucklehead, 10 Million Demons, and even the title track, as well as From the Outside In, these songs are great in that they created an atmosphere with that kind of a guitar chugging, and that's what led the song on, instead of those really elaborate interplay between the guitars and the keyboards. But then when you go and reproduce what you've already done, it's kind of like taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. So maybe that's why people like it. Even though it does still move forward, I don't know, maybe it balances a little bit better with everybody else, but for me, I could see the 3 steps being taken forward and very obviously seeing those 2 steps being taken back. So I hope this album is a heavy sleeper, as Subterranea was. Hopefully I'll look back on this with fondness and that I'll return to it. But for now, it's just a really nice kind of a release with its dark moods and its darker approach. Alright, notes out.